já não me enterro mais. A paz fez o mar da revolução invadir meu destino. A paz, como aquela grande explosão, uma bomba sobre o Japão, fez nascer o Japão da paz. Eu pensei em mim, eu pensei em ti, eu chorei por nós. Que contradição, só a guerra faz nosso amor em paz. Eu vim parar na beira do cais, onde a estrada chegou ao fim, onde o fim da tarde é lilás, onde o mar arrebenta em mim, o lamento de tantos ais.
Povo da paz, boa tarde. Prosseguimos na exploração dos mistérios do mundo ecoambiental que complementamos e reverenciamos respeitosamente por sua sacralidade, pela alma divina que o habita e anima. Na parte da tarde andaremos à luz de dois mestres, Basarab Nicolescu e Geneviève Leloup. Basarab, talvez em linguagem um pouco complexa, mostrará a interconexão de todos os saberes, processo que ele cunhou de interdisciplinaridade. Os saberes, se tomados como partes e pontos de um só conjunto, não só reforçarão a ideia de teia e conjunto, mas de sagrado e eco-encontro. Finalmente, Geneviève, filósofo e teólogo, utilizando como linguagem uma metáfora, dirá, citando Serafim de Sarov, ache a paz interior e muitos serão salvos junto com você. É importante agir, mas mais importante, saber contemplar. Convidamos Roberto Crema para fazer a apresentação do nosso palestrante.
É com imensa alegria que eu apresento Basarab Nicolescu, que nos honra com a sua presença, teórico físico do Centro Nacional de Pesquisa Científica, Laboratório de Física Nuclear e de Altas Energias da Universidade Pierre-Marie Curie, em Paris, professor da Universidade Babis Bolai, Romênia, doutor em Ciências Físicas pela Universidade Pierre-Marie Curie, em Paris, presidente e fundador do Centro Internacional de Pesquisas e Estudos da Transdisciplinariedade, organização sem fins lucrativos que conta com 170 membros de 26 países. Cofundador, com René Berger, do Grupo de Estudos de Transdisciplinariedade da Unesco. Autor de diversos livros, como Nus, a Partícula e o Mundo, As Raízes da Liberdade, já traduzidos em português, O Manifesto da Transdisciplinariedade, Ciência, Sentido e Evolução, O Homem e as Suas Três Éticas, mas, sobretudo, Basarab Nicolescu é um mestre de um imenso coração, um grande líder, mentor da transdisciplinariedade desde a Declaração de Veneza de 1986. E todas as demais declarações sempre sob a liderança de Basarab Nicolescu, que levanta com a sua lucidez, a sua profundidade, essa grande revolução epistemológica, cultural, científica, que é a abordagem transdisciplinar. Foi com esse documento, a Declaração de Veneza e a Carta Magna da Universidade Holística Internacional, documentos escritos no mesmo ano de 1986, que nós realizamos o primeiro Congresso Holístico em 1987, em Brasília, que deu origem à Unipaz e, posteriormente, ao Colégio Internacional dos Terapeutas. Basarab Nicolescu, além de toda essa competência científica, quando levantou a questão por que a ciência moderna nasceu no Ocidente, ele estudou profundamente, com a sua abertura à obra gnóstica de Jacob Boehme, e através do estudo da Trindade, desvelou a origem cristã da Idade Moderna. Algo totalmente inesperado. E, finalmente, Basarab Nicolescu também é um poeta inspirado. Autor do livro Teoremas Políticos. Ou seja, ele reúne, além da dimensão científica, filosófica, essa escuta e sensibilidade poética. E eu termino sua apresentação com essas três mensagens do Basarab Nicolescu. O gênio do cristianismo é dar um corpo ao terceiro secretamente incluído. Eu me procuro em todos os lugares onde eu não estou. O homem é mais que um abismo, uma sutileza. Com vocês, nosso querido Basarab Nicolescu.
I would like first to thank the soul of this conference, of this festival, which is Dulce Magalhães, for her kind invitation here. I think it's very important in our complicated world, in which there's violence, wars, killing, that one makes such a meeting in an act of vision and courage. I'm also very happy to meet here three of my old friends, Pierre Weil, Roberto Crema, and Jean-Yves Leloup. In fact, Pierre Weil is one of the first in the world who understood the importance of transdisciplinarity when we make this Venice Declaration in 1986, in which for the first time on institutional level there were the words metaphysics, transdisciplinarity. Pierre Weil understood that, and like Roberto said, was the founding document of the University of Peace. And I'm also very happy to meet here again my friends in spirit, which are Jean-Yves Leloup and Roberto Crema, who I think are between the most advanced thinkers in the world today in this, animated by this transdisciplinary attitude. Now, the title of my talk, I recall you, is the transdisciplinary nature of peace today. Let's see if it works. No. Yeah. So, the notion of peace changes with time. The peace for Egyptians did not mean the same thing as the peace for contemporary world, confronted with the presence of more than 8,000 academical disciplines and more than 10,000 religions and new religious movements. The atomic bombs present on our planet, Earth, have the potentiality to destroy not once, but several times all our human species. Is some problem? Technical problem? Pierre? With the sound? Is okay? Which discipline will decide today what peace means? History, philosophy, theology, economy, politics, logic, literature, mathematics? Academic disciplines are important by themselves to decide what peace means. Their conclusions are contradictory one to the other, and no meaning is generated. What religion or culture will decide what peace means? Religions and cultures are today antagonistic, involved in a war of values. There is no harmony between religions and cultures. So how a given religion or given culture could say what peace means? Who will decide what peace means? Politicians? They speak about peace, but they make war in order to impose peace. Military leaders? Their very existence is based upon war, not upon peace. Poets, perhaps? Their power is null in our societies. Economists, they face the economical war. Every economical big company tries to be the first, the best, to conquer the others. By producing mass destruction arms, the economy is flourishing. How could one make peace? By making war. Is it merely accidental that the new century begins with an act of horror that marks forever the imagination of our generation and of those to come? The capacity of human beings to forget is certainly infinite, but it cannot act on symbols. And it is precisely a symbol that was aimed at by the cold and implacable brain of an esoterico-technological engineer who conceived the act of staging the castration of the economic and financial power thought of till now as untouchable on September 11. We cannot keep silent and accept what is at the end of the road, the self-destruction of our species. It is crucial to ask questions about the roots of this horror if one really wants to put oneself on the road of a new kind of learning reality. One lesson I draw myself from the period we live starting with September 11, 2001, has to do with the unfathomable pornography of the binary thinking. This phenomenon is not new. Modernity invented all kinds of deaths and ends as a consequence of binary thinking: the death of God, the death of man, the death of nature, the end of history, and tomorrow, perhaps, the end of science and the end of religions. The binary logic of the absolute truth and of the absolute falsehood acts today with astonishing shamelessness. Slogans such as "the fight between good and evil," or "God is with us," have great success with the masses. And it is amazing to hear an old Leninist slogan, I quote it, "Who is not with us is against us," in the mouths of a great liberal leader. Is it so difficult to see that binary thinking is precisely the favored ground of terrorists? Is it so difficult to see that violence always engenders violence in the absence of a new logic? An eye for an eye leaves the world blind, said Mahatma Gandhi. New logics have to be integrated in the process of new education and new learning, both in a theoretical and in practical way. A second lesson I draw is the necessity to rethink the problem of the sacred. We eliminated the sacred in what we thought to be an act of freedom, of liberation of the human being. Thus appeared the reign of relativism, in the name of which one can assert anything, and also the contrary of anything. The terrorists act in the name of God, and those who fight against terrorists act also in the name of God. Which God? Are there as many gods as there are religions? I think that our vision of the world must integrate the search of the transcultural and of trans-religious. The transcultures, I will come back, but for the moment let me say two words. The transcultural designates the opening of all cultures to what which cuts across them and transcends them, while the trans-religious designates the opening of all religion to what which cuts across them and transcends them. This does not mean the emergence of a unique planetary attitude. The old principle, unity in diversity and diversity through unity or from unity, is embodied in transdisciplinarity. The peace today has a transdisciplinary, transcultural, and transreligious nature. If we do not consider this fact, the peace is simply impossible, in my opinion, in the world of today. Let me go now to say what is transdisciplinarity. As I said, there is not one religion, there is not one culture, there is not one religion. There are many, too many, many. I propose the inclusion of the meaning beyond disciplines in 1985 in my book, As the Particle and the Word, and I developed this idea over the years in my articles and books and also in different official international documents, and many other researchers over the world contributed to this development of transdisciplinarity. Now, a key date in this development is 1994, when the Charter of Transdisciplinarity was adopted by the participants at the first World Congress of Transdisciplinarity in the Convento de Rábida in Portugal. This idea of transdisciplinarity didn't come from heaven or just from the pleasure of respecting the etymology of the word trans, Latin word, meaning across, between, and beyond, but from my long practice of quantum physics. For an outsider, it might seem paradoxical that it is from the very core of exact sciences that we arrive at the idea of limits of disciplinary knowledge. But from inside, it provides evidence of the fact that after a very long period, disciplinary knowledge has reached its own limitations, with far-reaching consequences not only for science, but also for culture and social life. The crucial point here is the status of the subject. Modern science was born to a violent break with the ancient vision of the world. It was founded on the idea, surprising and revolutionary for that era, of a total separation between the knowing subject and reality, which was assumed to be completely independent from the subject who observed it. This break allowed science to develop independently of theology, philosophy, and culture. It was, in fact, a positive act of freedom. But today, the extreme consequences of this break, incarnated by the ideology of scientism, become a potential danger for self-destruction of our species. On the spiritual level, the consequence of scientism had been considerable, because for scientists, the only knowledge worthy of this name must be scientific, objective. The only reality worthy of this name must be objective reality, ruled by objective laws. All knowledge other than scientific knowledge is thus cast into the inferno of subjectivity, tolerated at most as a meaningless embellishment, or rejected with contempt as a fantasy, illusion, regression, product of the imagination. Even the word spirituality has become suspect, especially in the so-called developed countries, and its use has been practically abandoned. In fact, the economical development seems to go hand in hand with the spiritual underdevelopment. Objectivity, set up as the supreme criterion of truth, has one inevitable consequence: the transformation of the subject into an object. The death of the subject is the price we pay for objective knowledge. The human being became an object of the exploitation of man by man, an object of experiments, of ideologies which are proclaimed scientific, an object of scientific studies to be dissected, formalized, manipulated. The two world massacres of the past century, not to mention the multiple local wars and terrorism, are only the prelude to the self-destruction on a global scale. In fact, with very few exceptions, modern and postmodern thinkers gradually transform the subject just in a grammatical subject. They say it's no reality for the subject. It's an invention. It's in fact, the subject today is a very thick book in French, which is by a very important philosopher, which is written in France about that subject. this point, is that the subject is today just a word in a phrase. The quantum revolution radically changed this situation. The new scientific and philosophical notions it introduced, the principle of superposition of quantum yes and no states, discontinuity, non-separability, global causality, quantum indeterminism, necessarily led the founders of quantum mechanics to rethink the problem of complete object-subject separation. And I must quote here three big names who thought deeply about this problem, who were big founders, Nobel Prizes of Physics, and at the same time big philosophers: Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, and Wolfgang Pauli. For me, beyond the disciplines signifies the subject. More precisely, the subject-object interaction. The transcendence, which is inherent in transdisciplinarity, is the transcendence of the subject. The subject cannot be captured in a disciplinary camp. Now, let me tell you a little bit the methodology, some words about methodology of transdisciplinarity. On these slides you have in front of you, there is the difference which is written between multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, and transdisciplinarity. In two words, multidisciplinarity concerns the study of an object by several disciplines at the same time. The interdisciplinarity concerns the transfer of methods from one discipline to the other, and transdisciplinarity is studying that which is in between disciplines, across disciplines, beyond all disciplines. If this word beyond disciplines was not present, transdisciplinarity was just equivalent to inter or multidisciplinarity. So it's very important to realize that. Now, let me say some words about methodology of transdisciplinarity. There is, in fact, today, after many years of research, an axiomatic character of the methodology of transdisciplinarity. What this means? This means that we have to limit the number of axioms, or principles, or pillars, to a minimum number. Any axiom which can be derived from the already postulated ones have to be rejected. That's rational thinking in its beauty. This fact is not new. It already happened when disciplinary knowledge acquired its scientific character due to Galileo Galilei in his dialogue on the two great world systems. Now, what are these three axioms? The ontological axiom, first. The ontological axiom says that there are in nature and in our knowledge of nature different levels of reality and correspondingly different levels of perception. Let me just quote, and I'll come back to that, the logical axiom, the second one, which is the passage from one level of reality to another is ensured by a new logic, richer than the logic of yes and no, which is called the logic of the included middle, of the third. And the third postulate is complexity axiom, which means that the structure of the totality of levels of reality and perception is a complex structure, in the sense every level is what it is because all the levels exist at the same time. Now, what is important is that the above three axioms give a precise and rigorous definition of transdisciplinarity. Let me describe now what reality means. Reality means what resists, is the key concept of transdisciplinarity, pragmatic and ontological at the same time. So reality means that which resists our experiences, our representations, our descriptions, our images, even our mathematical formulations. Insofar as nature participates in the being of the world, one has to assign also an ontological dimension to the concept of reality. Reality is not just a social construction, like some philosophers say, the consensus of a collectivity, a kind of inter-subjective agreement. It also has a trans-subjective dimension. For example, in science, exact science, experimental data can ruin the most beautiful scientific theory. One has to distinguish between real and reality. Real means what it is, full stop, without no qualification. It does not resist. While reality is connected with resistance in our human experience. The real is, by definition, veiled forever, while reality is accessible to our knowledge. And I think for many practical purposes, it's very important to distinguish between real and reality. By level of reality, I designate a set of systems which are invariant under certain laws. For example, these quantum entities, quantum means at the level of infinitely small and infinitely brief. So quantum entities which are subordinate to quantum laws, which depart radically from the laws of the macro-physical world. In some sense, they don't mix together. This is to say that two levels of reality are different if, while passing from one to the other, here is symbolized two levels of reality by these lines. So, if I go from one line to the other, this means that there is a break in the laws. The laws are not the same. And it's a break of fundamental concepts. For example, causality. There are many causalities. So, what is designated by the empty space between the two lines on the scheme, which is shown there, is a discontinuity. It's a kind of hole. Empty. With no thing inside. No resistance inside. I'll come back to that. So, the introduction of several levels of reality. In this scheme, you see n levels, multiple levels, induces a multidimensional and multi-referential structure of reality. We have different ways, different glasses, different ways to look to reality. It's built, in some sense, in ourselves, this fabulous capacity. So, a new principle of relativity, not relativism, relativity, emerges from the coexistence between this complex plurality and open unity. In the sense that no level of reality can constitute a privileged place from which one is able to understand all the other levels at the same time. Like in the old thinking. Old thinking was hierarchical. We have a fundamental level, which is physics, and from physics we can derive anything we want, even love. In the 19th century, there's a rich literature on that. So, this principle of relativity is what originates a new perspective on religion, politics, art, education, social life, war, and peace. And when our perspective on the world changes, the world changes. The great Brazilian educator, Paulo Freire, asserts in his Pedagogy of the Oppressed that saying a true word is equivalent to the transformation of the word. So, this transdisciplinary approach is not hierarchical. There is no fundamental level. No fundamental. But the absence of fundamental level doesn't mean anarchy or schizophrenia of reality. Means synergy between levels which are discovered or will be discovered in the future. And this is a scientific fact. It's not a metaphysical or philosophical fact. The levels we know about in a scientific way, they are interconnected. Now, an important point is the zone between two levels. You see, in the zone between two levels is nothing. There is discontinuity. In other words, in the terminology I just sketched to you, there is no resistance. There is no resistance also outside the levels. I mean outside in the sense that the levels must stop somewhere. Our knowledge cannot be infinite. We are not gods. We are made of flesh, of brain, of limited way of knowledge. So in some sense, of course, knowledge can continue forever because one can place even an infinite number of levels here. But the distance between the lowest and the highest, the distance not in space and time, but the distance in this symbolic way, is finite. So outside is no resistance. And this is something extremely deep, both on physical level and epistemological level. Because this has to do with what is called incompleteness. The laws governing a level is just a part of the totality of laws governing all the levels. And even the totality of laws does not escort the entire reality. We have also to consider the subject who observes the object and its interaction with the object. So, I make this point because it's very important from the following thing is that the zone between the two levels is a non-resistant zone to our experiences, representation, description, images, mathematical formulation, and quite simply, the transparency, we can use the word transparency of this zone, is due to limitations, as I said, of limitation of our bodies and our sense organs. Limitations which apply regardless with what measuring tools are to extend the sense organs. And we have very powerful tools now. In particle physics, we have accelerators which can look into the infinitely small and infinitely short. We can look even in some sense to experiment what happened in the first few seconds of the Big Bang. So, the zone on non-resistance corresponds to what we can call the sacred. I define the sacred to be that which does not submit to any rationalization. I cannot make discourses on the sacred. I cannot make theories on the sacred. The only thing I can say about the sacred is that it is there. And that's rational assertion, very rational. Proclaiming that there is a single level of reality, that all that collapse to one, like classical thinking says, eliminates the sacred, and self-destruction is generated. Now, the unity of the levels of reality and its complementary zone, so units of reality, levels of reality, and its complementary zone of non-resistance, of transparency, constitutes what we can call the transdisciplinary object. This transdisciplinary object is much richer than what classical thinking told us. It's just one object at the level of reality with given laws. If we know the laws, we can get everything we want. We have determinism, we have everything. Now, in the similar way, we have to speak about levels of perceptions. Levels of perception means that in ourselves there are possibilities of perceiving these different levels of reality of the object. Otherwise, the communication will be impossible. And this perception, it crystallizes through the huge moment of inspiration for poets, for writers, for scientists, when a really new thing is discovered, new laws. And the photograph, which is there, is the photograph of the philosopher who inspired me for these levels of perception, called Edmund Husserl, the founder of the phenomenology in philosophy. So the unity of levels of perception and its complementary zone on non-resistance constitute of what we can call today the subject, transdisciplinary subject. Again, a much richer entity than what classical thinking told us. Now, the ellipse, which is drawn here, as in the case of levels of reality of the object, designates just what I call the synergy between the different levels. They are not, it's a unity, but it's not hierarchical. But it's a unity. In a rigorous way, in fact, what we can call levels of perception are in fact levels of reality of the subject. So they are levels of reality of the subject, levels of reality of the object. And the existence, as you know, many of you here present, the existence of different levels has been affirmed by different traditions and civilization from when word humanity is humanity. But this affirmation was founded either on religious dogmas or in the exploration of the interior exploration only of the subject. The new thing is science, and science is a huge force of knowing. We'll come back to that in a moment. And now, the two zones of non-resistance of the object and the subject have to correspond each other, to communicate with each other in order to be correspondence, communication between subject and object. In other words, these loops of synergy must touch at least in one point, which I designate in order to avoid any kind of dreams, too fast dreams. I denote just by X, which appears here at this point like a kind of source of all reality, in fact. The source of levels of reality of the object, the source of all levels of reality of the subject is the source of non-resistance, of the sacred. So it's more general, even the sacred. So we see that we have a ternary partition that I try to convey to you in this introductional part. We have the subject, the object, and we have a third term, which I call the hidden third. Why I call the hidden third? I call the hidden because it's hidden from the point of view of our reason. It's hidden for our measurements, it's hidden for our thinking, it's hidden for our theories, it's hidden for our discourses, but is there. In order to allow the communication between the subject and object. And these three terms, subject, object, and the hidden third, are independent one to the other, in the sense that cannot be reduced one to the other. So, certainly, if you follow me a little bit, you guess that the huge difference with the model which the past left to us, the classical thinking, modern and postmodern thinking. We have to go to a transmodernity now. So, postmodern thinking, which claimed the break. Modernity told us there is nothing between the subject and object. It's just subject versus object, nothing in between. Postmodernist thinking goes even worse. They say it's even not object here. It's just subject multiplied in an infinity of levels, different ways of looking, glasses to look to reality. Extreme relativism is the theory which predominates, in fact, today. Extreme relativism. So, what is important also to realize is here we have a flux of information which crosses all levels of reality of the object, and we have a flow of consciousness which crosses these levels of the subject. And these two have to be in harmony. Otherwise, the world will be destroyed. So, based upon our definition of levels of reality, we can identify other levels than the ones in natural systems, in physics. For example, in social systems, we can speak about individual level, geographical and historical community level, family, nation, the cyberspace-time community level, the planetary level, and the cosmic level. The transdisciplinary perspective of modernity, in particular, integrates the old notion of cosmos, which is a fabulous idea which was left to us by the Greeks. The harmony in the universe. Cosmos. By the way, cosmetics, comes from cosmos, but it's... Now, the transdisciplinary object and its levels of reality, the transdisciplinary subject and its level of perception, and the hidden third define the transdisciplinary model of reality. Now we can say what reality means in our transdisciplinary approach. Based upon this structure, ternary structure, subject, object, hidden third, we can define a lot of our other levels, which can be extremely fruitful in different analyses, in different disciplines, in different specialities, in a context. This abstract, looks abstract, levels of reality, subject, object, hidden third, must be put in context. If they are put in context, you generate, for example, just me enumerate, will be a new conference if I say all what this means really in detail, but let me say the words which can resonate in you. Levels of organization, levels of structuring, levels of integration. That's a ternary. Other ternary, levels of confusion, that's very important than confusion. Levels of confusion, levels of language, levels of interpretation or representation, levels of ignorance, levels of intelligence, levels of contemplation, levels of objectivity, levels of subjectivity, levels of complexity, levels of knowledge, levels of understanding, and levels of being, words which were mentioned in different plenary talks. Levels of being, levels of materiality, levels of spirituality, and there are even levels of non-duality. There is not one non-duality. In the light of the levels of reality, we can speak about 4 types of peace, coming to the problem of peace. The peace with ourselves, the peace with others, the peace with the earth, and the peace with the cosmos. The peace with ourselves. If there is no peace in ourselves, how can be peace in the world? At our own level of reality, we have to harmonize thoughts, feelings, and body. Only then peace with ourselves can be made. Otherwise, interior conflicts are generated in a perpetual suffering, and interior conflicts inevitably led to exterior wars. Peace with others. True tolerance is here the challenge. Tolerance. And the word tolerance is extremely ambiguous, in fact. The other may be radically different from me, even an adversary. But if I recognize in himself or herself the light of the hidden third, I realize that my own existence is on a different level of reality, united with the existence of the other. What we can call, with a wonderful word introduced by Emmanuel Levinas, in French, but I translate in English, the otherness. The otherness is the highest richness we can have in our life. Peace with the earth. Modernity accustomed us to treat earth like a slave. We take all its richness for our benefit, even if the price is the death of the world, of the earth. We exploit nature, we exhaust its potentiality, and we exhaust ourselves in an infinite search for consuming, more and more consuming. We treat Earth as being, in fact, on the same level of reality as ourselves. It is not. The Earth has a cosmic purpose. We have to make peace with the Earth if we want to survive. Next point, the peace with the cosmos. What I mean by that? We have to cease to believe. The many philosophers who try to convince us that life is an accident, which appeared on a marginal galaxy, that hazard is the king of the cosmos, and that no transcendence is conceivable. If they are right, killing and destroying would be allowed, and wars will be our perpetual reality. From time to time we'll speak about peace, but wars will be the perpetual reality. The great scientist of today tells us the contrary. The cosmos is an harmonious being. We can even use the word being, full of open and hidden intelligence. We can even say that the cosmos is alive, like an alive body. In fact, the 4 types of peace, which I just put here because we are speaking, so we have to analyze. But the 4 types of peace are in fact interrelated. We cannot live in peace in this world if we don't make peace with ourselves, with the earth and with the cosmos. If we mix the levels of reality by generating what I just called levels of confusion, war, and maybe the terminal war, will be the only issue. Let me go now to the next axiom, which is the included middle. The incompleteness of the general laws governing a given level of reality signifies that in a given moment of time, one necessarily discovers contradictions in the theory, describing the respecting level. One has to assert A at some given moment and non-A in some given moment. It's exactly what happened in all history of science. We discovered contradiction and we went to a new theory, a new level, in fact. It's precisely how we went from classical physics to quantum physics. However, our habits of mind, scientific or not, are still governed by the classical logic, which does not tolerate contradictions. One of the axioms of classical logic is what is called the excluded middle. What means the excluded middle? In simple words, means there is no a third term t from the third, which is at the same time A and non-A. But in quantum physics, that was the big intellectual scandal of the beginning of the 20th century, last century, when quantum physics was discovered. Physics, the queen of sciences, showed without all the time contradictions between wave and particles, continuity, discontinuity, separability, non-separability, local causality, global causality, symmetry, breaking of symmetry, reversibility, irreversibility of time, and so forth. The solution is relatively simple, is to consider precisely the notion of levels of reality. If we consider the level of reality, we can have a third term which is at the same time A and non-A. In fact, neither A nor non-A is something new, richer. And is the historical merit of a French philosopher called Stéphane Le Pascu, who lived between 1900 and 1988. There is a book in Portuguese about him, published by Trium, with having shown that the logic of the included middle is a true logic, mathematically formalized, multivalent, with 3 values, A, non-A, and T, and non-contradictory. We don't assert absurd things, even if we say there is a third term, which is and that and that. And you see, it's far-reaching. Now, in fact, for people who have knowledge in the room, of quantum physics, they know that this principle of the included middle is in the core of quantum physics by what is called the basic principle of superposition of yes and no states. Yes and no. Spin, different quantities, physical quantities. And so our understanding of the included middle is completely clarified if you introduce these levels of reality. So the action of the logic of the included middle on different levels induces an open structure of the unity of levels. And this structure has considerable consequences for the theory of knowledge because it implies the impossibility of a self-enclosed complete theory. Knowledge is forever open. But we have to be careful in the sense that logic of the included middle does not abolish the logic of the excluded middle. It just restricts the domain of validity. The logic of the excluded middle is very good in simple cases. For example, driving a car on the highway. You have not a third way between the allowed and unallowed way to drive the car. But in complex situations, where the subject is involved, like economical situation, social, cultural, religious, political spheres, can be very harmful. Is a logic of exclusion, the logic of excluded middle. War or peace, good or evil, right or left, heaven or hell, alive or dead, woman or man, rich or poor, whites or blacks. And would be very revealing to undertake detailed analysis of war and peace, of xenophobia, of racism, apartheid, anti-Semitism, or nationalism in the light of the logic of the excluded middle. And I have to express here my complete synergy with what was said in the talk, plenary talk of Roberto Crema, when he spoke about depassing this division between diabolic way of thinking, which is the way of analytic thinking of science, and the symbolic way of thinking, which is the thinking mainly of the traditional thinking. So we have, he said, and I agree totally, to go to a third, included third. Both are useful. Devil is useful in some sense. So, the included middle logic is a tool for an integrative process. It allows us to cross two different levels of reality or perception and to effectively integrate not only in thinking, like I did in front of you, but in fact, some of you perhaps they are sufficiently open to feel what I'm saying. But not only in thinking, but also in our own being to integrate this third. The use of the included third is a transformative process, in fact. But at that moment, the included third ceases to be an abstract logical tool. It becomes a living reality, touching all the dimensions of our being. And this fact is particularly important in education or learning. I spoke about that yesterday in the other room. Now, a few words about the last axiom of transdisciplinarity, the complexity. There are several theories of complexity, in fact. In the context of our discussion, what is important to be understood is that the existing theories of complexity do not include neither the notion of levels of reality nor the notion of non-resistance. However, some of them like the one of Edgar Morin, are compatible with these notions. It is therefore useful to distinguish between an horizontal complexity, which refers to a single level of reality, transversal complexity, which is sometimes confused with transdisciplinary complexity. So transversal, which means crossing different levels of organization, of structuring, but situated on the same level of reality. And vertical transdisciplinary, vertical complexity, which is traversing several levels of reality. So, from a transdisciplinary point of view, complexity is a modern form of the very ancient principle of universal interdependence. Complexity doesn't mean complication. Complexity means interwoven. The principle of universal interdependence entails the maximum possible simplicity that the human mind can imagine, the simplicity of interaction of all levels of reality. And this simplicity cannot be captured by mathematical language, but only by symbolic language. Again, we see two complementary languages which are both necessary. It is interesting to note one point is that the combined action of ontological, logical, and complexity axiom engenders values. The transdisciplinary values are neither objective, they are not postulated by people, or somebody, or government, or an organism, neither subjective, it's not just an agreement. They result from the hidden third, which signifies the interaction of the subjective objectivity of the object, of the transdisciplinary object, and the objective subjectivity of the transdisciplinary subject. We live in an interconnected world, and conflicts in one part of the world necessarily generate conflicts in other parts of the world. We have a common destiny, which certainly is not, at least I hope, is not our common death. If we choose life, we have to choose peace. And the hidden third is our guide on this way. In concluding remarks, let me say a few words about paths for the future on what I'm saying here. Of course, nobody can seriously predict the future. In the transdisciplinary approach, our linear time, past, present, future, is an anthropomorphic construction, a crude approximation of what is really the living time. The living time is linked to the intersection of all space-times which act on the different levels of reality. So we can decipher the traces of the future in the sound of the present moment, if we decide to open our eyes. Everything exists in the present moment, and the past, and the future. Let me describe in few words what kind of actions are, in my opinion, of an urgent nature. First point, development of transdisciplinary education. I spoke longly about that yesterday, but just now to say a conclusion, I would say in transdisciplinarity, we'll always talk about three types of intelligence. The analytical type intelligence, the feelings intelligence, and the intelligence of the body. Transdisciplinary education in that sense is an integral education, in the sense that it tries to put in equilibrium the three types of intelligence, and after that, to begin to think really, with a new type of thinking. The transdisciplinary education founded of the transdisciplinary methodology allows us to establish links about persons, between persons, facts, images, representations, fields of knowledge and action, and to discover the eros of learning during our entire life. And the creativity of the human being is conditioned by permanent questioning and permanent integration. In that sense, the transdisciplinary education is first of all an education for peace. Now, other point, is dialogue between science and spirituality. Can you come back to the slide before? Before. Yes, just here. The transdisciplinary model of reality allows us to define three types of meaning. Horizontal meaning, this means interconnection on one level of reality. This is what most of academic disciplines do. Vertical meaning means interconnecting, interconnections involving several levels of reality, and this is what poetry, art, or quantum physics do. And the third, the meaning of meaning. The meaning of meanings, this means interaction of involving all of reality. What I mean, all of reality is what I said before, the subject, the object, and the hidden third. This is in fact the ultimate aim of transdisciplinarity, the meaning of meaning. But the way is long, and we have many other things to solve before. But in any way, on this ultimate aim of transdisciplinary research, the dialogue between science and spirituality is the main axis. Now, of course, it may seem for some of us paradoxical to speak about cultures, spiritualities, including religions, in transdisciplinary approach, which seems to refer by the word itself to academic disciplines. However, the presence of the hidden third explains this fake paradox. The crucial difference between academic disciplines on one side and cultures and spiritualities on the other side can be easily understood if you contemplate this figure. You see, academic disciplines are concerned with the field of the object, with different levels of reality, even often with fragments of levels of reality of the object. While cultures and religions and spiritualities are like these transversal sections here involving and object and the subject and the hidden third. And this hidden third is in fact common to everybody, if we accept this description. Common to all cultures, common to all religions. But the point is that it cannot be formulated. So if it's rigorously directed, this research, for trans-cultural, trans-religious, trans-spiritual things, will never arrive at a dogmatic religion, a dogmatic spirituality. It will be always a kind of uniting them in a transcendent way. Other people spoke in the past about this unity, transcendental unity of cultures and religions. Now, in particular, technoscience, which is the basic reality of our time, social reality, is entirely situated in the realm of the object. And this asymmetry between technoscience and knowledge, academic knowledge in general, and cultures and spirituality shows the difficulty of the dialogue between science and spirituality. And this dialogue can become possible when will be a true conversion. I use on purpose the word conversion of technoscience into a real culture. And this is possible, methodologically possible, because the hidden third cross all levels of reality, even the levels of reality of object. In some sense, this sacred infiltrates, penetrates all levels. Now, let me say as a last point about building a new spirituality. Spirituality is a completely devaluated word today, in spite of the meaning of the word, which means respiration in an act of communion between us and the cosmos. And there is a big spiritual poverty present on our earth. It manifests as fear, violence, hate, dogmatism. We look at the television, we read the newspapers, every day is full of that. So, my conclusion, and I take the responsibility for my conclusion, is that there is a need, obvious need, for a new spirituality, what I will call a trans-spirituality, conciliating technoscience and wisdom. I think that's the major challenge of our time, to conciliate technoscience and wisdom. Of course, there are already several spiritualities present on our earth from centuries and even millennia. One might ask, why is there a need for a new spirituality if we have them all here and now at our disposal? It's a kind of supermarket, right, of spiritualities in any part of the world. The first motivation for trans-spirituality is technoscience, which is associated with fabulous economic power, which is simply incompatible with present spiritualities. Technoscience drives a hugely irrational force of efficiency for efficiency's sake. Everything which can be done will be done, for the worst and the best. The second motivation for trans-spirituality is the difficulty of the dialogue between different spiritualities, which often appears as antagonists, as we can testify in our everyday life. The new phenomenon of planetary terrorism is not foreign to these two problems. In simple words, we need, I think, to find a spiritual dimension of democracy. Transdisciplinarity can help with this important advancement of democracy through its basic notions of transcultural, transreligious, and trans-spirituality. Through trans-spirituality, the spiritual poverty could be eradicated and therefore render the war of civilization obsolete. The trans-spiritual attitude is not simply an utopian project. It is engraved in the very depth of our being. Conclusion. If I follow rigorously everything which I said in different languages in the present conference, I have to draw a conclusion which might be shocking for some of you. But I have no choice. I have to conclude that if one single human being is killed on this earth by another human being, this signifies that the human being is not yet human. I know that in some extreme situations, war and killing seem to be justified. But our true problem as humans is not to arrive at these extreme situations. In fact, the roots of war are in us and not outside us. Therefore, as a great French poet, René Daumal, said in a famous poem, the only holy war is to eradicate from inside us the roots of war and allow the roots of peace to flourish in us and on the earth. Thank you.
We would like to thank you. This is a mandala that we are giving to all the members that we invited. Thank you so much for your presence.
Queridos, a nossa ideia é que façamos daqui para frente uma conexão entre todas as coisas que irão acontecer. E que coisas irão acontecer? Num primeiro momento, nós pensamos em fazer um intervalo de meia hora agora. Depois chamaremos Pini, 5 minutos, Jean-Yves, uma palestra de aproximadamente 1h15, um pessoal da tradição mais indiana, cantando mantras e saudando Jean-Yves, e já vamos para o nosso momento de conexão. Se ficar bem para vocês, é assim que estamos procedendo agora. Meia hora de intervalo, então. Obrigada.